All right. Hey,
Right.
everybody. Happy Friday night. Thanks for joining us for another podcast episode. Today, we have a very, very special guest on. Kyle, this is someone who I met at a big gym down here in South Florida called Redcon. And I was just watching Kyle train people and just his training techniques. I wanted to have a conversation. So I just struck up a conversation, asked him what his level of fitness was and how he got into it. And then he just blew my mind with all the information that he had to share
Thank you.
about human performance, athletic performance. And I know this is something that's been very close to mine and Jake's heart. Grew up being athletes and always just trying to be better with that performance and reaching our true potential. I know this year I've shared with you guys that I used to be a ketchup addict. And so I have almost completely removed ketchup from my diet. So, Kyle, I used to eat about a cup of ketchup every single day at night with a French fries. And so this past year, well, starting January 1st, I gave it up. So it was an alcohol or
Cold
ketchup
turkey.
addiction. I'm going to
Yeah.
Ketchup Anonymous twice a week now. And so, but with that, we just wanted to give Kyle a platform to be able to share his story and how he got into the gym and how he got so passionate to it about that. So, Kyle, if you just want to kind of dive into, how you got started in the gym and what promoted all this, man.
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say I'm an 80s baby, right? So the 80s and 90s, fitness was shoved down our throats from cartoons to the movies, everything in between, right? Cartoons were muscular, they were larger than life. G.I. Joe was huge, and I remember just being a little kid and my dad, he was in the Navy, and, he'd have friends come over and they were all like muscular and fit and jacked. And it's as far back as I can remember having that like male ideal of being someone that's strong and fit and competent, right? And that's something that's always stuck with me throughout my life, and as I grew older and I found myself in different life situations, going back towards that fitness has always been something that's kind of kept me on the right path, so to speak. Right. So, from my childhood, having that influence of strong male figures. And then in my late teens, I kind of strayed from that path and became a little bit of a problem child. Right. And in that process, I'd say I lost my way a little bit. And I think, a lot of kids don't necessarily have strong father figures or role models in their lives, or don't always have that as a steady state throughout their lives, right? We have divorced families, you know, the gamut is wide when it comes to that stuff. And by the time I was in my late teens, I found myself in and out of the system, right? And the fitness endeavor really became a sort of cosmological constant in my life that became something I can really ground myself into and root myself to. And that became an endless pursuit to better myself and eventually other people as well.
So something that's really interesting that you bring up, like if we look at 80s, essentially, I guess they're called action figures. They're essentially
Yeah,
dolls for boys.
Yeah.
But like
right.
mine, I had Ninja Turtles, He-Man, She-Ra. I mean, she was my first crush. And actually, my slingshot, my Polaris slingshot that I have is named after her.
Right,
It's my first crush. It's
right.
my dream car. But then I don't know. I mean, I just love American Gladiators. Like that's something that we would sit around TV watching. These guys were just jacked on steroids, just
Absolutely.
walking around. Like it's like,
Absolutely. Yeah, it was larger than life, and that was the 80s and 90s for sure.
And then, like, what would you say it was your first gym experience, or like, what was that like getting into fitness? I guess from where you were.
Yeah, so great question. So I would say, fitness really became something that stuck to me when I was about 17, 18 years old. And, unfortunately, I was one of those kids. I found myself in the system at that age. I really didn't have a steady father figure in my early teen years. And, I ended up in the system and I needed something, right? And I ended up with a bunkmate at the time that was one of those action figures, like just a total genetic freak. And he worked out and gave me that in, which, was really life-changing at the time because I was not in a good place either mentally or physically and environmentally. So fitness quite literally saved my life at that time period. And I remember from 18 to 24, fitness is something that we did every day. We'd wake up, we'd work out. and that got me through a lot of rough times. And, before we go on and talk about uh, uh, the fitness endeavors that we do later on, I think it's important to remember that fitness itself and just the act of working out can provide a lot of people with motivation, accomplishments, you know, uh, purpose, something that fills a void that not everybody has. It provides them with something to achieve.
Hmm.
And it's something that's constantly moving because, as you guys may know, if you achieve something in fitness, you want a little bit more.
Hmm.
You want to get better. And sometimes as young adults, we lack that. We lack that desire to get better. So when I was in that time period of my life and finding a love for working out, and whether it's as simple as push ups or bench press or squatting, it's that constant desire to get better,
Hmm.
to compete against other people, to try and beat them. And that translates so well in life, right? Having the discipline to day in, day out, get up, work out, exercise, be better than you were. That translates to the workforce. That translates to being successful in college or translates to running successful podcasts. It's that desire to do better.
Hmm.
And when you talk about growing up in the system and not having that father figure, can you share maybe what your belief system was at that point and then how fitness really changed that to help you be what you've become today? Because I mean, it seems like you're just a sponge who wants to learn more information and everything you can. You also work
Right.
your ass off in the gym, which I appreciate totally. And like, I think that it just share, like, I think most of the time when you think about people who have been in the system, there's a belief system that creates a lot of that. Would you say that? And could you just kind of share what that was? Or
Yeah, and to be honest, it's kind of hard to go back, now being 40 years old and think to your mindset when you were 18, 19
Hmm.
years old, right? But, you know, being that age, you're easily influenced.
Hmm.
So then the question is, who's influencing you? Is it people who are trying to better their bodies, or are you being influenced by people that are doing drugs? Are you being influenced by people that read books, or are you being influenced by people that work out and then listen to rap music and heavy metal and just drown out their brain, right? So at that age and at that time period, it was more about having certain influences, however they got there, where it put me in a situation where I was bettering my body, I was bettering my workouts, I was getting a sense of accomplishment of like, wow, I achieved something, right? And then I also got a sense of camaraderie and friendship with people within the system that in a weird sense at that time kind of kept me safe, right? Just
Hmm.
being blunt. And being able to be that token white guy on the weight pile that works out and associates with people that read books, it really set me up for success later on afterwards. And fitness to me has never just been about working out.
Hmm.
It's been about accomplishing goals, setting goals, understanding what you need to do to achieve those goals, right? And when I was 18 to 24, having that mindset of just, you know, working out to achieve goals, of surrounding myself with people that also wanted to achieve those goals
Hmm.
and do the things necessary for those goals to come into fruition. People that read books instead of just listen to music, it really influenced me, for decades to come.
Hmm.
and when you started, I guess the biggest part of your fitness journey, were you doing it more from a bodybuilding standpoint? Were you doing it from just a powerlifting standpoint? Where did that progress and how did that go? When you start thinking about those goals, what were your goals? Were they in terms of how you looked, or were they in terms of how
You
much you
know,
could lift? How did that start
that,
off?
that's a That's a great question. So I think that, we look at these magazines and books and we assume that that crazy physique that we all look up to can just come so easily. And let me tell you, by the time I was out of the system, 7 years of working out, I barely looked like I worked out. Right? It's so much to do with, exercise science, your genetics, your diet, and getting everything right. In the time period where I really was getting into training, I would say it was purely just a love of, goal attainment and having a output for my emotions and my feelings and things to do with other guys in the system that were productive, right?
Mm.
And we all wanted to be big. We all wanted to be super jacked, but not everybody had the genetics to make that happen. And when you're in a environment like the system, genetics is all you have. So you're not going to get any bigger than what your God-given body is going to
Mm.
allow.
Mm.
Um, and as you learn more, as you train more, some of that volume or work that you've put in accumulates and represents itself visually, but it will never compare to what you can do in the free world when you have access to great food and great sleep and great training resources, supplementation, and everything else. But the key point I think that's important for a lot of people to understand is that training and working out is about the results, don't get me wrong, but it's also about having goals in your life that you stick to for long periods of time, regardless of the immediate gratification, and having the wherewithal to stick to those goals and surrounding yourself with people that have similar goals and are willing to work towards them. And that, I think, is where fitness really shines, regardless of the environment that you're in.
Yeah, I think other than a marriage or having children, the commitment that it takes to be in either one of those, fitness is the only thing that really can come anywhere close in terms of comparable, in terms of your own physique, your own body, your own mind, your own health, and your own well being, right? Because you have to tell yourself that you're committed to doing this process, even though you don't know how that journey is going to look like or how long it's going to take. Like, the ketchup for me is like, dude, this tastes really, really good. It's like, I don't really want to give up ketchup. I don't know what it's going to
Right.
look like, but the ability to go to the gym in the morning and not feel super tired from a sugar high or anything like that has been incredible. But it took time for me to just sit it down and say, this is the goal, this is what I'm going to do, and to be able to work through that process. In terms of your work ethic, did you like play sports as a kid, or where would you say that came from, or did it develop as you started just hitting the weights hard?
That I would say it was a developmental thing, right? I have always had the personality where if I get my hands in something, I kind of want to stick with
Mm.
it and see what I could do. I was never really into sports as a kid. I mean, I have this great memory of playing soccer and eating oranges, mid game, and I swear that I was in love with it. But when I asked my parents about it, they're like, Kyle, you hated soccer. What are you talking about? But I have like this most profound memory of being absolutely in love. Like I was destined to be a soccer player or something. Um, but I would say that, you know, I look back and I would say my dedication and love of fitness came from failure. I remember being in, from juvie to jail and then into the prison system. And I had done the push ups, I was doing dips with her body weight and working out with the water bags that are filled up. And I remember getting under 225 pounds on the bench press. And, this big guy behind me hands it out to me and it just boom crashes onto my
Oh.
chest. And I just felt so weak and embarrassed. And then I worked out and I trained. And one day I went out there with those guys and I got it. And that sense of accomplishment was like something up to that point, I never really had. Like I was a kid that dropped out of school in ninth grade, and I bounced back and forth between my parents and I had a troubled household. And, I never really had too many of those senses of like, I worked for something and I did it. And it's crazy to me that like that 225 bench press sticks out to me, but I remember that embarrassing moment.
Mm.
And then I remember training and never quitting and coming back and getting it. And just all the bros on the yard being like, all right, white boy, let's go. you know? And that's always stuck with me. And I even tell my clients to this day, if you fail at something and it strikes a nerve in you,
Mm.
and you have enough wherewithal to stick to it and come back and fight and win, you're going to hold on to that memory forever. And the people that just quit, they kind of hold on to that forever as well. So that victory kind of prepared me for everything else to follow. I mean, obstacles in college, I'm not going to quit. Obstacles in my career, I'm not going to quit.
Hmm.
If I could make it through this environment and accomplish things and get that sense of like, yeah, I can do that anywhere, you know? And I really truly feel like people that have something missing, if they can find something that's challenging for them and accomplish it
Hmm.
and then build on it, it's one of the most rewarding things anybody could possibly do. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the weight room, but that for me was like that magic checkbox where it's an infinitely scalable thing where I can constantly strive to be a better human than I was.
Hmm.
And I think that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah, something that you shared that's very, very interesting to me. So, me, I had a father who was there through everything, and actually, I think he was probably a little bit too supportive,
Right.
and he kind of guarded us. What's the better term for that, Jake? Where
Like helicopter parent?
no, where they were just overbearing, maybe,
Oh, okay.
and so one thing I've resonated with is that in the past couple of years, I have had a major loss. And up until that point, I always felt like I wasn't alone and that I had support. And what is was that when that major loss hit, where I went to a very difficult place to where I was like just feeling depressed and having anxiety, and it wasn't until I was able to realize that I'm here all by myself, and that I got to figure this out, and there isn't anybody that's going to come and save me. It helped me to realize how much more powerful I can be. Whereas previously, if I would have had a failure where I have 225 on the bench and it falls on me, and then people are there, I would have really had a hard time probably going back to that and standing up, because I just would have felt very, very awkward. So I was wondering, in your case, if that was a feeling that you had where at that point you were just pretty much by yourself and you didn't really care what other people thought of you because you didn't really have any other option. It was like you'd been by yourself and it's like, I'm going to go do this. Or like there wasn't that I don't know what that aloneness feeling.
So I would say for me, it's a little different because I've always wanted to be one of those people that kind of fit in, and I've always wanted to be the badass,
Hmm.
right? But I didn't quite know how to. I still don't know how to express that sometimes because I'm not always the winner. I'm usually the one on the losing end of the stick. But you know, when I was going through these time periods, through incarceration and dealing with people and working out and trying to find my way, I was I'm I was very fortunate that I always had supportive people.
Hmm.
And you know, one of the things about the system that's unfortunate for a lot of people is that you don't get second chances, right? If you have a bad name in the system, it's going to haunt you through the rest of the
Hmm.
system. If you get broken in the system, you're going to come out of the system broken as well. Um, I was fortunate that, you know, in my start, somebody for whatever reason went out on a limb and said, I'm gonna bring this guy along into the weight pile,
Hmm.
and no matter what happens, we're gonna allow him to coexist, right?
Hmm.
Now, when it comes to failure and success, it kind of felt like I always had to live up to this expectation of, bam bam, you know, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna win. And that is like a constant sense of motivation for me, but I never really had family that pushed me. So it was always an internal locus of control. It was never external. It was never I failed because of, all these outside factors. It was because of me. I wasn't strong enough yet. I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't prepared enough. I didn't check all the right boxes. And, you know, as much as I kind of dog on my parents or my dad a little bit for not being there, in the few years where he was present, he instilled in me this archetype of what it is to be a man,
Hmm.
right? And it's to show up. It's to, show up even if you don't want to. Like I have this memory of him getting excessively drunk and having to go to work the next day, so he slept on the couch because he said if you go to bed and you get too comfortable, you're not going to wake up and be prepared. You
Hmm.
know, I remember having a neighborhood kid knock on the door who kind of had these slumped shoulders and really depressed demeanor, and my dad being like, I don't want you hanging out with him, he's weak.
Hmm.
So always had these like archetypes in my head of what it is to be strong and powerful, but I never really had that constant father figure to try and live up to that. And as sad as it kind of sounds, in the system, I had some of those people to look up to because some of those big, powerful archetypes were there. And I was blessed in such a way that I was never on the bad end of these people. I was in a position to where I could go on the yard, I could lift weights with them, and I could try and strive to be better than what I was.
So inside of there, it's not necessarily just a free for all where it's everybody against everybody. There is support inside of there if you can connect with those guys, or is this just a very unique situation where you had the ability to be able to have that?
Great question. And the system is a very different experience for a lot of people and very different very different state to state. In Virginia, it is a very segregated system. Um, it is not common for white people to do sports with black people, to lift weights with black people, to eat at the same table as black people, and you are very much the minority in the system if you're white. So my experience, through that 7 years, I was the token white boy for the most part. And I was very blessed that whoever decided to put in that word for me, it really did. You know what? I really can't stress it enough. It really did set me up for success later on because I worked out. I got better. I got bigger. I networked with people that read books, that subscribed to magazines that were educational, that, encouraged me to do some of the right things that later prepared me to go to college and lift weights through college and then, graduate and have a career and do all these things that for most people coming from my background, that's a non-option. It's not something that happens. And, it is not typical for, you to be in the system and everybody be buddy buddy, cozy cozy. There's definitely cliques and groups, and you're either in the clique or you're not, right? And there are people that will set you up for failure. There are people that will manipulate people to do other crimes in the systems to support their causes. And, we call that getting caught up in the mix, right? And, you have kids that go in with 5-year sentences and they end up with 15-year sentences, 20-year sentences, or they don't get out. It is a real thing that's not exaggerated. And it's really all about you as an individual, one, not being easily influenced, knowing your path, and having good influences, right? You don't want to be easily influenced by the bad people, right?
Yeah.
But you want to have and be receptive to some of the people that are willing to help you or facilitate a positive track history for you.
Well, what's encouraged to me is that even though hearing your story, you're talking about the segregation that there was inside of the system, and as well as these people being individuals who maybe society would deem as criminals. Well, they are, but like uh, just as the worst of the worst, right? But that you can still see that people have a heart because they're willing to
Wild.
help you, and it's just like, man, like that just hearing you share that's like that's impactful. I mean, that hits kind of deep that these guys have hearts and that they care and they put some effort into helping you grow to become who you are right now, man. Like that's pretty special.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. And, I remember 3 people off the top of my head, and some from outside it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But, it's the people that you surround yourself with that are going to determine a lot of your life outcomes. If you're surrounded by successful people, if you're surrounded by negative people, surrounded by positive people that are doing positive things, that is going to have an impact on you. And in the system, we like to think it's all just bad people, and it is to a degree. But within those bad communities and within this, there's these subcultures and different groups and mentalities. And, none of them, most of them don't want to be bad people. They want to see people successful and thriving. But what that means to them is different than what it might mean to a young professional with an MBA, right? But they all understand deep down in their core that they don't want to spend 50 years in prison, right? So the question is how do you connect with some of those people and, build yourself up in such a way to be successful later on? And it's not something that you're like cognizant of at the time while you're there, but if you're constantly making the right connections and doing the right things and reading the right books, people will notice. And that can in turn put you into other positions that will set you up for success. To give an example, in one of the systems I was in, I would always kind of argue religion with one of my bunkmates, right? And we would argue in the sense of two friends having an argument, right? And he put me in touch with a professor, Dr. David Coogan out of Virginia Commonwealth University, that did a program called Writing Your Way Out. And through the connection with another inmate, I connected with a professor at VCU and essentially started journaling and writing about my thoughts and emotions and feelings and understanding, who I was at that time period and what led to the decisions that I made to get me into the system. Right. And that didn't come from the free world. That came from another inmate interacting with me saying, hey, I have an opportunity for you that might help you, and that's crazy to think about. But there are people in there that want to see people succeed,
And so, one thing in society that I've noticed is that when it comes to most conflicts and most disagreements, oftentimes it's because of our expectations and what we thought or our interpretations and not fully understanding people's intentions. So, when you go into the system and you see some of these people that have done maybe some heinous crimes and stuff like that, if you were to look at them purely from an empathetic standpoint, would you be able to see some of these crimes being committed with pure intentions? And maybe it was for one of their other family members, or maybe some of the things obviously are for ourselves or something like that.
Right.
What are your thoughts just on that, on people's actual intentions, being around people
Yeah.
who you
So,
consider misfits?
right. Very deep question, actually. So, in the system, there's a lot of different codes, right? So, we listen to rap music in the free world and we hear things like G code and gangster code, right? In the system, there's a lot of different types of criminals. Okay. The criminals that I would have associated with kind of had this G code type mentality where gangsters mess with gangsters. You don't mess with civilians, right? So you wouldn't be friends or jolly with someone that was in for rape or robbing an old lady or victimizing people. Those would not be the type of people that you would associate with. But people that are predators, whether towards young people or towards weak people, they tend to group up into their own groups. But these groups don't necessarily mix, if that makes sense. So when you talk about, networking with inmates and understanding intention, you have to be really careful of understanding if you're interacting with a predator or if you're interacting with someone who was engaged in a lifestyle and viewed themselves as a military agent and then got caught by the law and ended up in prison, which is a very different type of person and mentality than someone who is out committing crimes and robbing old ladies and, doing things like that. And it's almost like there's different codes of ethics in these two populations, if that makes sense. So when you're evaluating who you're receiving help from and who you're interacting with, you want to make sure that you're not on the predator side of things, right? You're not the prey. And that's something that's very scary because when we interact with humans, you don't always know their intention. You don't know if someone's being nice to you for some ulterior means, right? Are they being nice because they want to be nice and it feels good to them to do something nice for you? Or are they being nice to you so that they can ask something of you later on? Big difference, right? So it is an environment no different than the real world where you have to really be careful of the the boundaries of your relationship and the motivations and why you're helping each other. And one of the challenges in the system that I still struggle with today is transactional thinking, right? Like I spent so many years of my youth bouncing back and forth. I never really developed long-term peer bonds with people. So friendships to me were these ethereal things that would just kind of come and go. And then when I was in the system, a lot of the people that I interacted with were just transactional.
Hmm.
Do this for me, I'll do that for you. You're one of the bad people. I need to be careful around you. I'm going to stay away. I'm okay. I don't want to break bread. I don't want to eat. I don't want to work out with you. Damn sure don't want to shower after the workout anywhere around you, right? So you have to be very careful of that, but that can also be a damaging thought process because then later on you start to evaluate other friendships and relationships in that same transactional type of manner. I feel like I kind of detracted a little bit there, but you
No.
know, there's a lot of different types of people, and no matter where you are in the world, you have to make sure that you're both clear on the same page, right? Is this a transactional relationship, or is this a um, we're doing good because we want to do good, and we happen to just be doing good together, you know?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with being able to have effective communication, and that's like a lost skill in today's
It
day and
is.
age. Do you have any tips for what you've used to almost be able to sniff those types of transactional relationships out, or maybe those intentions to be able to separate yourself from the predators and doing it? Like, are you able to go up in within 5 seconds to be like, okay, like this is, I know where this is going?
Oof, it's tough. It's really tough, right? Good predators are deceptive. That's their bread and butter. That's what they do. They deceive people into thinking that they're good people. Um, I would say that the more someone asks of you, the least trustworthy they can be. The more someone tries to collaborate with you, the more you can kind of let that guard down a little bit,
Wow.
right? And you can almost tell, like, let's say you silly example, but let's say that you're going to break bread with someone and you guys are planning a meal, right? Someone who has more of a predator mindset might really do a lot of internal calculus and be like, I'm bringing $1.50 to the table. I got to make sure this guy brings $2.50 to the table. That way I'm getting ahead,
Hmm.
right? And the more of these little manipulations you see where they're constantly trying to get ahead, that's your red flag,
Hmm.
right? They're constantly manipulating and calculating how they can stay ahead of you. Whereas someone who just wants to break bread with you, hey man, I got this, you got that. Let's eat and watch this show. And it just doesn't have that cold calculus in the background.
Hmm.
That's really interesting because moving from a place like a small town in Michigan, we're from a town that only has 11,000 people. And so
Right.
we'd never seen a panhandler before. And then I come down to South Florida and you see them all over. And then when I come down here to South Florida and I still want to have that Midwest feel and that hospitality, when I want to go out to people, be like, hey, you guys want to go out to eat here? And I'm looked at like I'm a weirdo. It's like, dude, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And so it's really,
Hmm.
really interesting that when you're in an environment where people are coming up to your cars on a daily basis, asking for this, asking for this, asking for this, the guards, the walls, the big city, that we can
Hmm.
start putting ourselves up and just become to where I'm just like, holy cow, like this is so hard down here. Back in Michigan, if I say, hey, you guys want to go out to eat? It's like, here, you want to come over to my house? I'm going to make the meal and we're just going to eat. It's okay. Like, don't worry about
Right.
bringing anything, guys. It's like, it's
Hmm.
okay. But
Right.
down here, it's just like, what does this guy want from me? Like, what is he
Hmm.
trying to get? And I'm just like, nothing. I just
Yeah.
want, like, let's, how about conversation? Maybe I would like to have that
Right.
if we could.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and even more so when you get into populations where you know you're a minority or you're viewed as the enemy because you represent you know uh, as a white guy in prison, you represent in a way the system, right? You're the man. You're not one of us, if that makes sense. You know, I have such a hard time putting verbiage around it. In inner cities, and I mean bit deep into the inner cities, it's not uncommon for an 18 or 20-year-old to really never interact with a white guy outside of his middle school teacher or elementary school teacher or preschool teachers. Their parents,
Wow.
their parents' friends, their cousins, their uncles, and that changes as you get further and farther away from big inner cities and into more multicultural cities and things like that. But, if you go to Virginia's jail system and you talk to the 18 to 25-year-olds in there, the only white boy they know is a teacher, a probation officer, a cop, So you're not really viewed as a person to a lot of them. You're viewed as a representative of an institution, right? So, the hardest part can be is just getting them to view you as a person. I'm Bam Bam,
Yeah.
I'm Kyle, and then once you break that gap, then you can lift weights, you can talk about reading a book, you can, break bread together and have conversations. And there's a couple people, three or four in the prison system that I remember to this day is just having profound impacts on my development throughout the system and my survival, my safety, my ability to lift weights and enjoy that process. And, hey, read this book. And, a lot of them were like, oh, those science books, that stuff's stupid, blah, 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 white man science, da, 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 da. But, being around those guys, honest to God, put me in a position after prison to where I could go to college. I had some family help to get there, but if I were in the system and I didn't lift weights, I would have had no output for my emotional issues that I had as a child and as a young adult, which is why I ended up in the system. I would have no output for that. Instead of reading books and arguing back and forth with the guys in the system about that stuff, I would have been listening to music and, brain rot and TV and everything else. And instead, I'm reading textbooks and having my family subscribe to magazines for me and things like that. And those things set me up for success because I had 7 years of reading, reading more, reading more books, right? And then when I got to college, it was easy. I've been reading for years. I know how to do that. I know how to internalize a concept and then argue with you about it. And now the argument is an exam instead of another person, but I was prepared, and it's wild to think about it like that, but that's what happened.
Well, what's wild to think about as well is that you're talking about inside the system, you essentially have the same two options that you have in the real world. It's either to be entertained or it's to consume information and then to internalize that information and use it for yourself. And if we look at social media, you have the exact same opportunities, is that you can spend your time consuming things that just continue to develop you as a person, or they can get inside of you and change who you actually are, or you can use social media to actually learn information. But you can also use it to just consume and be a consumer. You can also use it to be a provider and a creator, a content creator, right? So to be able to create and be able to provide for other people. And it's interesting that even though you're outside of the real world, it's still the same process. It's like how we each have 24 hours inside of a day. How are we going to spend that 24 hours? Are we going to stay and enjoying it, listening to music, dancing around and feeling good? Or are we going to use it to create value inside of ourselves so that we can better ourselves and be somebody?
Absolutely.
That hits the nail on the head. Jake, before we go over to
Absolutely.
like the fitness, did you have any questions regarding anything Kyle's been sharing here?
I guess just looking back at it, it's kind of a weird question, but it's like, are you kind of grateful that you got put into that system at that age? Because it seems like that system and your bunkmates who encouraged you to get into working out and reading books, do you look back at it as like that's the turning point of your life and you're grateful that it happened regardless of it being such a crappy situation?
You know, If that did not happen to me, I can confidently say that my life would have gone down a completely negative course for
Right.
the long term. That being said, the amount of time, I really feel like they took something from me that
Mm.
I'll never get back, and that cuts deep.
Mhm.
And I also, you know, I really can't stress enough that my experience had such a stroke of luck that most people just don't get,
Mm.
right? I had the right cellmate, I had the right bunkies, I had access to the right people in the system that set me up for the next 7 years to be successful. And most people that I've seen do not get that.
Mm.
And, you know, thank God, so to speak. But I wish there was a way in which the system fostered that in kids instead of just throwing them into the system and saying, "Hey, you're going to do X amount of years, and however you come out, you come out." And in my experience, just I was, I was, wow, how do I word this? I'm not religious, just throwing that out there, but I was
Mm.
blessed,
Mhm.
right? Truly blessed that um, I had access to the people at the right time to put me on the right path. And I am thankful for that because without that experience and without some of those people coming into my life, I was not on a path where I would have done great things or good things.
Because it's
So,
almost
you
like
know,
you were put in a position where it was sink or swim, and there were some lifeguards over there that were throwing you floaties. Essentially, I don't know who those
absolutely,
guys were that were looking
absolutely.
out, but like you had those floaties right there next to you, and there were guys that were helping. It's just like, dude, it's an amazing story to hear that people, like I said
Mhm.
before, had the heart to be able to do that. So going from this process into where you are right now with wanting to train people and getting them into essentially being able to reach maximum potential physically, how did that transition work?
Right. So, we talked about the 80s, right? Superheroes. In the system, there were literal superheroes, right? Two of my workout partners that helped my lifeguards, S. Dot and Skibo. These guys were monsters, right? And I was not. I look back at my photos from back then that I still have, and I'm like, I worked out. Come on, man. But as I grew into college and then, into my more sports performance background, I'm able to draw on all that workout experience and then really understand, what boxes I not checking or unable to check because of my life circumstances and my genetics just didn't naturally bring that out. So how do I go to the next level? How do I become that monster, that athlete, that person that can really bring out the best in people, right? So it started in the system. It started with working out and seeing some people just naturally become, athletic monsters and other people don't. And then when I got out of the system and I graduated college, working out was something that always stuck with me. I graduated college, I worked out all through college, right? I ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I found this gym called Beat Personal Training. Okay. They were a high dollar athletic environment for athletes, soccer players, track and field athletes, football players, volleyball players. And the coaches out of Beat Personal Training ran a powerlifting club where you could benefit from their shared knowledge that they had just by being a member of the powerlifting club. So I remember joining that and thinking, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the bomb. I've been working out for like a decade. I know what I'm doing. And when I got there, I realized that I had no clue what I was doing. I knew how to exercise,
Mhm.
I knew how to work out, but I did not know how to train, right? I knew how to work out and my goals become my goal, or my goals come to fruition because I bumbled my way to them. I kind of stumbled my way there. But, the sports performance center, they trained athletes through a process, right, to attain your goals. And that really took my training and my working out to the next level. Now I was like, okay, I have a thing that I love, working out, and I've done it for years. So I've got a decent base, right? But this base is built upon practical application, but not a lot of knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once I was in this environment, I was able to learn from the coaches, see how they were applying things, ask questions, all I wanted. And I was a sponge. I was able to just absorb information, work out, and combine that with what I had from the system, which was that desire to set goals, fail at the goal and obtain it. Now I could put that together into programs and workouts and, take people from here to here to here to here and set these little mini goals along the way that fill people with a sense of pride and accomplishment and joy. Goal attainment is like a universal human thing. We all want to attain our goals, right? So the gym became my new playground for that, right? Be personal training. It's where I really started to get into powerlifting, competing, and understanding that working out is more than just going to the gym and showing up.
Because I think Jake and I, this is where we kind of come into this influence and this mindset of trying to be the best athlete you can be, but also looking and seeing like how other people are exceeding that level. And it's like in society today, if you don't grow up in a home that has a strength and conditioning coach or a nutritionist or someone who's really, really in health and fitness as a parent, and they understand calorie intake versus calorie output, calories in, calories out, what proteins, fats, carbs, and what those all look like, you don't understand how much of being a good athlete in your athletic performance relates to just simple math.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, just to build on that, I break training up into this trifecta, food, sleep, drugs. Okay. Food, calories in, calories out. But it's also a lot more complex than that. It's how much can we train your body to efficiently process X amount of calories and then manipulate that so that you can do more. If you go from a machine that can say process 300 carbs to a machine that can process 500 carbs to a machine that can process 800 carbs, you are a different organism. Your body temperature is higher, your muscles are bigger, your ability to do longer workouts at higher intent is better. You have created a different organism in a very large sense. So your ability to manipulate various training variables is going to have a profound impact on your performance. But none of this is done in a silo, right? If we look at training, we have to look at our lifestyle, our access to equipment, our temperament, and our ability to stick to a program. Some people are a lot more robotic, other people are a lot more ADD. Your ability to break up complex things into small goals. Like look at an Olympic quadrennial, right? These guys and girls aren't training with like just the Olympics in mind. They have stepping stones all throughout the process that are indicators of success or of opportunities to pivot and then rebuild so that your weaknesses do not slow you down throughout that process. So, when we look at training, we can't just look at it in isolation. Just like when you were saying, it boils down for a lot of young athletes, their parents and what do they know, and the coaches, and how much money do you have to afford things like food and coaches and recovery modalities and emotional, psychological coaching. All of that can play a factor in creating an athletic person, right? So when I'm working with athletes, I like to first understand their why. Okay. What is your why? Are you doing this because you love it? Are you doing this because you love the idea of it? Are you doing this because your parents want you to. And don't get me wrong, doing something because your parents want to is not a bad thing. But if you understand your why, you can set goals and then parallel goals. Like, okay, you don't necessarily care if you bench 225, but you care if you can um, grab somebody and exert X amount of force in Y unit of time, right? So if I understand your why, I can teach you and show you how some of these other things have application. You may not care if about this goal that your parents set for you, but if that goal can align with things that you do care about and we can identify those to you and show you that value, then we're setting you up for success. So it all starts with the why do you want to do this? Why is this the goal? And then from there we can build.
So, Jake, something that's interesting in our family is that we come from the same genetics, right? But one of my biggest skill sets was having power and being able to hit home runs and hit a baseball farther than a lot of people. However, you have the same genetics and yours was speed. Like, Kyle, what are your thoughts on two brothers being able to come from the same family and having such different, uh, I guess, strengths when it came to athletic ability? Like, well, how does that associate? It had to have been training regimen, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, when we're growing up into our sport, psychologically, we like different things. It could be as simple that Jake enjoyed training certain aspects more. He then worked harder in those aspects, which then made him more of a speedy lifter because it was training those attributes. You potentially had an emotional satisfaction that you got from power training. So you worked harder at those things that your coaches were having you do, which in turn made you more of a powerful athlete. Right. So sometimes it could just boil down to your training excitement and intention during those developmental stages, which yields drastically different outcomes 10, 15 years down the road. It could also just be a fluke. You guys could be twins, but through environment and everything else as you're growing up, your genetics are expressed in slightly different ways. You know, um, Similar to like you have the same genes, but your facial hair grows differently. The I think they call it a phenotype expression. The genes are the same, but how how that is expressed comes out differently.
No, that's actually a really good point. So as you were saying that, I was thinking of our family meals. And so we would go out to eat quite a bit. And me being
Right.
the oldest, so I would eat all my food. And I was like always excited that I had 5 brothers and sisters because I knew they weren't going to eat their food. So my dad called me the garbage disposal. And so I was eating all their food. And so maybe Jake was quite a bit younger than me. So maybe he was malnourished because I was stealing some of his food to the point to where he didn't weigh as much as me. And that's why he was quicker. But
There
it's
you
really
go.
interesting being the oldest and eating all the food. Maybe I just
Yep.
always had more weight to put on and more calories in to be able to accomplish that. And then I guess when you go to breaking down athletes, so me and you spoke quite extensively in the gym about how you would train someone who is going to be a basketball player or trying to jump versus someone who is let's say trying to hit a baseball as far as they possibly could, or doing any type, maybe a boxer or something like that. Like, what are those different aspects and how do those work?
Great question. It's important to understand that, like, for most athletes, the weight room is just what we call GPP, general physical preparedness. You're not competing in a bench press or a squat or a vertical jump. You're competing in your actual sport. But you can be more physically prepared for your sport demands by being a more powerful athlete. So, an example I like to give: let's say that you're a basketball player or a track runner, right? And let's say that you can squat two people; they can each squat 225 pounds. But person A can do an aggressive knee bend and barely get 225, and person B can dump 225 and move it as quick as lightning, right? Now let's take those exact same people, put them on pavement, and have them run. The person that can only do 225 and it's hard for them, every step that they make, every time their foot strikes the ground to propel their body forward, their 160-pound body weight is relatively heavier to them than the guy that can squat 315. The guy, or 225 lightning, right? So by being stronger, by being powerful, by being able to move quick as lightning, you are enhancing your athletic potential, because everything to you at your body weight is relatively easier. If you can squat 275 and it's easy and the other guy can only do 185, every step that you make off that concrete, your body's capable of doing 275 and you're only asking it to do 160. You're relatively doing less work compared to what you're capable of than the other guy. Okay? So strength is never a weakness, but you don't want to be slow. You want to be fast. You want to be lightning. So what I try and teach my athletes is that in the weight room, your goal is to move well, move efficiently, and move quickly. Because in your sport, you need to move well, you need to move quickly, you need to move efficiently. The more retardation that we have in our performances, the less it's going to carry over to your sport. If you can't execute a barbell squat well, right, and you're twisting your back and your spine's going all over the place, the right muscles aren't working, you're loading your hips wrong, your quads aren't doing anything, how would you expect that to help you when you're trying to do a quick reversal of direction? It wouldn't have the same carryover. You're slow, your body's not moving correctly, and it's not moving the way it's intended to move. The fundamental movements, squat, bench, and deadlift, these are things that we do every day, from getting out of a chair, getting off of a toilet, getting up off the ground to run, getting up when we fall down. We stray away from them sometimes because I don't know why. Somehow we've been convinced that these things are risky and too hard. But in reality, they are our core life functions broken up into simple movements. You have to push something, you have to pick something up, and you have to get up and move. By doing these core, and not to detract, but this is why almost every sport has variations of these lifts. Football players, volleyball players, hockey players, they all have some form of combination of squats and benches and deadlifts that they're doing. Sometimes it's disguised as an Olympic lift, a clean and jerk and a snatch, but you're still bending down, picking it up. You know, these are fundamental movements where if you get stronger at them to a degree, it's going to have sport performance carryover. The question is what are you missing? Are you a person that can grind and grind and grind and you can do an immense amount of work for a long period of time, but you're extremely slow? So what attributes as an athlete do we need to bring up? And that's where a lot of coaches go wrong, is they just look at it as a squat, but when really it's understanding your athlete, their sport demands, their strengths and weaknesses, and then tailoring those lifts so that we're bringing up what is required. So let me give you a kind of silly example. I was recently coaching a girl, and she was a gymnast, right? And when we put the weights on the bar, she could move the barbell. And we're using what's called a velocirometer to measure speed. Okay, so it can't be fooled. You attach a string to the bar. There's a unit that measures how quickly that bar is moving. And then you have the athlete lift. And this athlete was performing 0.5 meters per second, whether there was 45 pounds, just an empty bar, or whether it was 95 pounds. So that tells me from a coaching perspective that her nervous system and her musculature does not know how to recruit muscle fibers to do a specific task really quickly. Because whether she has a light amount of weight on the bar or a heavy amount of weight, she's moving at the same speeds. right? So we had to train her body to move quick, to move with intention. And then after 4 weeks, she's able to move at double the speeds that she used to be able to. So you think about this, take a step back and think about this. Imagine being able to move 100 pounds. Actually, we'll basic gym example, 135 pounds. So a 45-pound plate on the bar. And let's say that you can move it at 0.5 meters per second, which is relatively slow. And then you go to being able to move that to 1 meter per second, right? And we standardize techniques. So we have a standard of you stand up, go all the way down to where your hamstrings touch your calves, and then you rock it up. And the fastest, let's say someone could do that is 0.5 meters per second. And then they train to be able to do that at double the speed, 1 meter per second, maybe 0.9, somewhere in there, but effectively double. You have become a person who can recruit all of their muscle fibers to fire at the same time, quicker, faster, and in control, balanced, coordinated. You're not unstable. You're not losing position, right? That type of improvement carries over to life and it carries over to sport. You are a faster entity. Your muscles and your nervous system can fire quicker. That's the goal with training athletes. It's not about just lifting heavy weights. It's about lifting weights that make you at your body weight more explosive, more controlled, more efficient.
And in order to get that explosiveness, you've talked about using the tool to measure how quickly they can push it. That quickness, it only has to do at the extension of the exercise or the second half of the exercise. Does it also have, like, take a squat, for example, does it have to, it's not about going down as fast as you can and then up as fast as you can. Is time over attention play a role in that, or how does that equate to kind of what you're sharing?
Great question. So in sports, speed is king. So in bodybuilding, and if your goal is just growing muscle and hypertrophy, then you really want to milk that descent to a small degree. Doing a 10-second eccentric, 6-second eccentrics, they are not necessarily that much better than doing something like 2.5, 3 seconds, right? But when you want sports performance, you want to be able to go down as quickly as possible. Take that stretch reflex that develops, or boom, out the bottom and come back up. But you need to be able to do that in control. So when you look at athletes and they're just dive bombing their squats, for example, and you can notice like they're shifting all over their place, their hips are moving all over, their knees are moving all over, they're not in any semblance of control. That's not a strength. That's an injury waiting to happen. But if you can do that quick, that is a skill. Now, with all skills, they come with a trade-off, right? If you are extremely good at dive bombing a squat, maintaining position, and then coming right back up, that's going to be great if you get knocked down and need to get right back up. You have that explosive skill. You're a very dynamic lifter. But if you are also trying to grow some extra muscle and slowing down that eccentric and developing the power at the bottom where you are the weakest instead of bouncing out of the bottom, now we're talking two different things, right? We went from a pure power athletic movement to a movement that's now biased a little bit more towards developing strength or developing muscle. And that's why you'll notice that some, powerlifters, they'll do pause squats or they'll pause their bench presses and they're removing some of that elastic tension and that stretch reflex that occurs so that it is their muscles that need to initiate the movement of the weight. There's always a trade-off in lifting, so we need to understand what it is that we need. Do I need this athlete? Do I need this wrestler to have more starting strength where we need to pause, allow that stretch reflex to dissipate, and then his muscles initiate the stand-up? Or do I need this slower lifter to develop the stability and the coordination and the neurological coordination to drop into that squat as violently and quickly as possible and stand right back up. And I want him to think about grabbing his opponent and boom, right? You're an explosive dynamic lifter. We have to understand what goals we're trying to do. And that also can go right back to what do we need? If I already have someone that's very dynamic, but they're weak, I don't need them diving their squat down and then skyrocketing back up at 0.8 meters per second. I need him to go down slightly controlled, minimize that stretch reflex, pause, and then on the pause, I don't want you to dip your butt down a little bit and then get a little stretch reflex and rebound back up. I want you to, from that static pause position, initiate your movement back up, right? So we have to understand the why. What do we need? What attribute are we trying to tease out? And it's important that we periodize our training because at different times in a training cycle, you're going to need different things, right? If you're 3 weeks out from a competition or from a wrestling match, I don't want you doing strength training, but I want you to stay dynamic. I want you to stay explosive. So maybe we keep some fast dynamic squats in the mix, but we're not training for muscle size. We're not training to add fatigue or to have that muscle damage that you get from doing a really slow eccentric. We want you to stay dynamic. But 10 weeks out, 15 weeks out, maybe I want you to be stronger. But maybe you're so big, you're so close to your weight class, we can't risk any hypertrophy, right? We can't risk you getting bigger. We don't want your legs bigger. So now we have speed for power training, and then we have like pure strength training, 5 sets of 3 at heavy loads, but we're not doing sets of 12. We're not doing sets of 10. We're not getting on the leg press after trying to grow those muscles. We can't. We need you to be strong and fast. Understand the athlete, understand the sport demands, and understand what systems that athlete needs to be maximally successful. And I always tell people in life and in sport, strength is never a weakness. However, you can prioritize strength to such an extent that it takes away from your sport. Strength training and the barbell is general physical preparedness. How prepared can we make you as an athlete?
And when you're talking about strength is never a weakness, but inside of your sport, it can be. You're talking about you can get stronger as well as get slower inside of getting stronger, correct? Is that what I'm understanding?
So look at it like this. Strength is never a weakness in the sense that if you are a 180-pound male, right? And let's say that you get to the point where you were previously unable to squat 315 and now you can. That strength will never be a weakness. But if you fall in love with the process of getting strong and you forget that strength is just your general physical preparedness for your sport and you begin prioritizing getting strong over skill development in your sport, now you've changed focus. You've changed priorities. Strength is never a weakness when your goal is strength complementing your sport. But if you neglect your sport demands and if you lose sight of what you need as an athlete and you only train for strength, you will lose some of that carryover to your sport and increase your risk of injury because the stronger you get, the more injury prone you are. You know, there's some make-believe charts that we could just imagine where it's like upper limits and lower limits. Like I would never want to have my wrestler not able to squat 225 if they're 180 pounds, right? Like you should be able to squat double your body weight, things like that. But do I need my wrestler to hyper focus on squatting so much that he can squat 3 times his body weight? No. It's not needed. You are gonna wrestle 180-pound men, right? So being able to manipulate 315 pounds like it's lightning and maybe max out a 365 or 400-pound squat, if you're on the right of the bell curve when it comes to strength potential, that's going to benefit you. But training to squat 600 pounds is going to require you to shift your focus so much more towards strength and away from your sport that that will become a weakness because you're no longer practicing your sport. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is very close to what I was talking about. Is that I just turned, well, I'm getting ready to turn 41. It's not just turned. That was last year, I guess. I turned 40. And in that process, I was thinking about, I wonder what it would take to be able to dunk a basketball at 40 years old. I was thinking about that process. And I was like, I could probably do it, but I wouldn't be at all the goals that I probably just accomplished over the last year of like building my arms, my upper body. It would be me having to drop weight and increasing my legs. So I'm going to be the skinny string bean that, yeah, I'll be able to dunk a basketball, but all the other things that I just tried to accomplish are going to essentially disappear.
Right. So I would look at it like this. You have what you are now as an organism. You have your body weight, your current power outputs, your current strength levels, and your current diet, right? And then I would just do an experiment. If I can currently move 100 pounds more than my body weight, and let's say it rings in at 0.5 meters per second, right? And that I bring that up because 0.5 is like a strength zone. And if you're training 100 pounds more than your body weight, for most people, that's going to be pretty hard, right? So, that's what, a 275-pound squat for you?
Yeah.
That would be pretty hard.
One time or how many times?
One time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever. I always usually do sets of 6 or the least, just because of my age, and I'm trying to not. I'm trying to have
And your
really good
six
form.
is what? 185? 185, 200
No,
pounds, somewhere in there?
6 regular squat. I think I can do 215, 225 probably.
So what I would say is at your current strength level, when you hit that ground, you have what's called a strike rate, right? You can put so much power and force into the ground. If we get your squat up, and I don't mean just ball busting hard squat work. I mean, if we can get your fast, efficient, powerful squat up to, 1.5 times your body weight, somewhere around there, and then we measure your jump, and we do this while we're practicing jumps. We're not training for just the squat. We're training for the squat to enhance the jump. So if we can get you stronger so that when and neurologically coordinated, so that when your feet, boom, go to execute that jump, you are so strong, so powerful that your neurology can just hit that ground so much more efficiently and generate force to propel you upwards, right? You're used to doing that with 275. Now your body weight is so much easier, so much easier. So if we combine jump training with power training and get you stronger while ignoring the fatigue that we would get from building more muscle, that to me is how we would approach training for that dunking the basketball. We're increasing the efficiency on which you can jump by making your relative body weight that much easier because you're able to lift 275 or 315.
And then you also talked about genetics playing like a huge role in this. Like, what are the limits for someone who, like a kid or an athlete who's like, okay, you know what? I've listened to what you guys are saying. I'm gonna really start watching my nutrition. I'm really gonna get my program down and really exhibit all these things. Well, how would you talk to them about their limits of their genetics?
Wouldn't. No, we can't change our genetics.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that will spend so much time, I'm just not built like that. I don't have the build for it. I just can't do it. And that to me just sets you up for failure right away. Can't change your genetics, ignore them. What we do know are key performance indicators of where you are now. What happens if we push those to the right just a little bit in terms of strength and in terms of speed? How do we do that in training? How do we complement that with nutrition? And nutrition is key. It's key. I joked earlier about how, I worked out in the system for years, and I look at some of my photos, and I'm like, gosh, did I even work out? But you get me the right food, my body will transform. We want to
Okay, so that's
turn
what you
you
were talking
into.
about inside the system in terms of the genetics. It was how the nutrition was affecting your genetics, not so much your limitations. Okay, okay, that's why I was okay, okay.
Yep. Yeah, and there's people in there who are just, they could be IFBB pro bodybuilders, and instead they're locked up eating ramen noodles and peanut butter and look absolutely insane, and you just can't compete with some of those genetics. And I mean, I'm sure you guys coming from sports backgrounds, there's guys that could go out and drink beers and have abs and veins sticking out of their arms and show up and play sports. And other guys, it's like, man, I had to go to bed at 9 o'clock. My parents had to spend $20,000 in coaches, and you just showed up, man. Come on. Genetics are king. And, I try not to focus on it, but they're there. So instead, what I try and look at is, where are we now? And what tools, what cards can we play to shift our curve a little to the right? And that's going to boil down to food, training, and drugs. And when I say drugs, I mean anything from a Tylenol PM to a melatonin to help you sleep, to a pill that's going to cut back a little bit on inflammation so that you could train the next day, to actual sports performance drugs that people also take. But drugs is a wide gamut. And creatine, this and that. There is a whole slew of drugs that people take and manipulate to get small performance outcomes, and they work. They add up. Drugs do things. You take your body, right, your genetics, and you put it in an environment of high sleep, quality training, consistent sport demands that become scaffolded. You train this, which will then enable you to train this, which then enables you to train this. And then you do that in an environment where you're providing the substrate and the raw materials for your body to perform efficiently and to build the requisite muscle to allow these things to happen while reducing your body fat. You want to have the good micronutrients, you want to have your macronutrients in place, you want to eat quality foods, and it needs to be, in all honesty, a lot more structured and cadenced than people realize for it to play a measurable impact. I look at people all the time, and they talk to me about their diet. I'm like, honestly, if you didn't wake up and have like an amazingly nutritious breakfast, and then 4 hours later have a very nutritious meal, and then 3 to 5 hours later another nutritious meal, and then another 3 to 5 hours later another nutritious meal, then you're not checking all the boxes. Case in point, I did a powerlifting competition I think 3 years ago, and I was on the runway of success. I just benched it was 507 pounds in a previous meet, and I wanted 512. Last 8 weeks of a meet, I always just take as much money as I want to spend. I want my meals pre-made. I want a gallon of milk a day if I want to go buy it. I have an infinite supply of money when it comes to food to set me up for success. I need to make sure I'm going to bed. I'm not, I'm going to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I'm taking a 5 milligram melatonin so that I start getting drowsy before 10:30. And, I'm just setting myself up for success. And then, I had some life dramas, and I detracted, and then I failed that competition. And I looked at it and I'm like, did I do all the things that were required? I was missing meals. I wasn't sleeping right. I didn't do the things that I normally do. Did another competition, and we made a pact at the time. I'm like, there's going to be no fighting. There's no arguing. I'm going to spend X amount of money. The freezer is going to be filled with steaks. I'm going to work with this food company, and I'm going to make sure I have 7 meals a week that are pre-made, and then I'm going to make breakfast, and then we'll make dinner when I get home. And we're checking every box. Went to the competition, benched 512 pounds, hit a lifetime PR, and cried a little bit after because it's like, yeah, I set a goal, I succeeded, I checked all the boxes, and I got that life victory. But people drastically underestimate the impact of food, of having that breakfast, having those pre-made meals so that you could just grab one, having the support structure in place to make all those things easy and efficient and not stressful plays a monumental impact on sports performance. Food is king, and it trumps any supplementation that you could possibly take.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. Like in our household as a family, we grew up on Fox or boxed food. So like you'd ask my dad what his favorite meals were. He'd be like tuna helper, hamburger helper, meatloaf. Like, and then we were so busy as a family. So there were 6 kids. I'm the oldest. Jake's the youngest. We were always sports. So it was going to McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and going through all that. And then what you're talking about, food, is so important because I feel better in my 40s than I did in my 30s. 2 years ago, I cut out all alcohol, so I haven't had anything to drink in over 2 years. Last year, I cut out all hard sugar. So for my birthday, I had key lime pie, but other than that, there was no candy, no desserts, no crumble cookies, none of that. And then this year, like removing that ketchup. And it's like, as I continue to remove specifically sugar and alcohol, which is converted into sugar, essentially, right? Yeah, removing all of those things, the inflammation that I used to have is just almost completely gone. To where my joints and everything just feels so good. And I guess going into like, what are your thoughts on the American diet, or if there's people out there that are listening that are wanting to be athletes, like, and maybe they don't have a nutritionist, and maybe they're just getting started on this journey. For me, growing up, I used to drink a lot of pop, and so at 12th grade, I ended up spraining my ankle, went to a chiropractor, and he kind of told me about the essentially harms of pop. And so I laid off pop. But I did it on certain levels. I went from pop to lemonade to Gatorade to now I've strictly drank water for the last, 22 years. So,
Wow.
yeah. And it's like sometimes it just takes progression. So if you have anything to like maybe share for people on nutrition, how do they progress and how do they just continue to work? Maybe be mindful on things. If they do go out to eat, okay, we'll eat this, not this, or just watch this.
Yeah. So, I think that, depending on how you grew up, you have a very different relationship with food. And you need, once you decide that you want to become an athlete, you need to lock in for a certain period of time, right? And in your general life, there's nothing wrong with having a pizza here and there or going out for hot wings with somebody or whatever the case may be. But if these things become habitual behaviors, it shows in the waistline, in our physiques, and in our performance really, really quickly. And having a healthy relationship with food and being able to consume food in order to perform is very different than eating to survive and eating to get by in life, right? Performance based dieting isn't chicken and rice, right? That's the first thing people need to understand. You can eat diverse foods from a myriad of food groups without it being harmful. But you need to be eating, either 80% clean, and if you have really bad genetics, 90% clean, and then you have your little cheat meals in between. Okay. Now, think about how our bodies prefer to receive fuel. It's via carbohydrates, right? So you want to make sure that you're having a nice balance of healthy carbs, complex and simple carbs in our diet in strategic places. And you want to also make sure that you're tracking what you're putting into your fuel tank and then doing the dipstick test every now and then, right? So that would be, your performance indicators to keep yourself honest. So, just to rewind a little bit, when you're competing and when you're an athlete, food is your performance driver. You want to become within your weight class constraints a carbohydrate processing machine, because that is your body's preferred fuel source. You want to have sufficient protein to maintain, if not build, your current muscular tissue. And then you want to have sufficient fats to maintain your hormone regulation and your sanity. You are driving carbohydrates to drive performance. You are using your proteins to build or maintain your muscle mass. And you are using your fats to maintain your sanity, palatability with your food, and hormone production. All of the macronutrients play a role in a performance-based diet. Now, tracking is important because most athletes and athletic endeavors exist within weight class constraints. If you are just eating and eating and eating, you get too big. You're either going to be booted out of your sport because of it, you're out of your weight class, or you're going to become too big to perform because you're too weak to perform, right? And we can't constantly pursue strength. If you are a runner and you get up to 220 pounds, you're not going to be a very good runner anymore. You know what I mean? So our bodies naturally are going to have some constraints there. If you're tracking, it becomes really, really easy to know when your weight is becoming runaway. And hop on that scale, take a weekly average, and your coach would ideally put you into a time period where you start here and you slowly build up these rungs of success into your competition date. And what I do, and I'm just going to give a very basic powerlifting example because that's my sport of choice. I like my people to compete as big as they possibly can. Okay, so we're going to start with the competition date. On competition day, I want to compete at 225 to 230 pounds. The day before competition, I need to weigh in at 219 pounds, somewhere under 220. As close as I can get to that 220 mark, the better. I'm a little guy. I cannot healthily walk around at that size. Or healthy for my body weight. And then I continue my training regime where, let's say, I get down to 200 pounds. And then over a long time, I add more muscle, I stay healthy. And when competition season comes up and I'm reaching that point where I have a date, I have a finish line. Now we can hit that mental switch and really check all the boxes for training. And you can't do that year round. You can't be on 24/7, 365. You just burn yourself out. When you're competing and you have a competition date, and then you have a preparatory phase where you are preparing for that competition date. So let's say I take a person, 200 pounds, of a 25-week prep time. I've got about 20 weeks where I want to take that 200-pound person and make them as close to a muscular 220 pounds as I can, right? So we can push calories and gain an average of 1 pound a week, a pound a week, somewhere in there. And over a long period of time, as we are giving you increasing sport demand, as we're asking more and more of the body in terms of performance, we're providing more and more nutrition, more and more calories, more and more fuel for the tank. As you are doing more and more sport demand, your calories are going up, your body weight is slowly going up towards your upper limit. You get closer to the weigh-in day, 215 pounds, 218 pounds. Now we start slowing things down and we maintain that body weight, get you some training at the body weight that you're going to compete in. And then at the last home run, right after weigh-ins, we're going to push the envelope. And we could test that envelope a little bit beforehand and say, hey, how much weight can we bulk up in the last second and you still feel healthy? You still feel good. You don't feel lethargic, right? You want to test these things out a little bit beforehand. There's a lot of ways to perform or to gain that weight. So we want to gain the musculature Then we can fill it out with retention and water retention and make you a well lubricated, thick machine. And then towards the end, we add in that psychology, that heightened emotions and arousal states. And now we've got a muscular unit that's very retentive with a lot of joint compression, and you're really big, and you have the psychological stimulus because you're not burned out. You haven't been training like a psychopath for 25 weeks of prep, so it's like we're building towards this eight, and then you perform, get healthy, and then you repeat the process at some point in time. But you are really only pushing your limits for a couple weeks there, and the rest you're building successes.
And I think for a lot of people, this just seems like a very difficult process, because they come from a place where we show up at 3 o'clock to practice. We go from practice to 3 to 4, and that's it. And so I think for me as a young kid, it was like, I wish I would have worked smarter and not harder, because I put in so much effort, so much hard work. It was extremely difficult, and I kept pushing, 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 pushing. And I wish I would have just worked smarter and went through all of this process. So, Jake, what about you?
And
You
it's
have any?
What's up? I was just going to talk about, like, more so, I guess, for people who don't want to go into a sport, or people who don't want to go into powerlifting or anything like that. It's just the mental advantage from just being fit and active, and just all of the, I don't know, just the dopamine release you get from doing hard things in the morning, and just, I don't know, doing hard things and that feeling of completion. And it just, I don't know, from going from not doing anything for a long time to somebody who just starts to do something, starts to work out, starts to get active, and it's crazy how much that impacts your mental fortitude.
absolutely. When I gave my example, it's really for someone who's competing, but speaking on general population, and you know that sense of competitiveness can still be there. And you get up, you do these activities, you go for your run and your sprints, and you get that dopamine hit. And I take those people that get that and are like, I just want to be generally fit. I'm like, that's great, but after you do that for a while, why don't we try something crazy? What is a goal that you've always had? What is something that's always been like on the cusp of attainable, but you've not quite done it? Whether it's a timer on the mile, or a half marathon, or a certain barbell lift, my favorite. But you have, no matter who the person is, there's something that's kind of out there where it's like, man, I want to be able to do that. And after a while, I believe naturally the general workouts, that dopamine will become less and less. And what I encourage people to do is, like, once a year, if you're really crazy, a couple times a year, set a goal and train for that goal. And then you will have that major dopamine release again, that big sense of accomplishment, because instead of just getting up and going for another run, which used to do it for you, but after 3 years of that, you're like, man, now it's my routine. But if we push the envelope and set a much larger goal, now we can periodize our training and do something similar to what I gave in my powerlifting example, where we have these little stepping stones, and then we start tweaking the nutrition, and then maybe for 3 or 4 weeks you're really playing with your sleep, and then we have a preparatory run, another preparatory run, an easy session, and then a hard session. And now we're building this momentum, right, for you to accomplish something that previously wasn't obtainable. And that's the next level, right? That's where we went from just generally working out to training. And the general workouts, I think, will work for 90% of the people 90% of the time. But eventually we get tired, we get sick of the routine, and we want that challenge. And that's where that training training modality really comes in, and sports performance and nutrition and sleep and supplementation and miniature goals and having the discipline to pull back off the gas pedal so that the next workout can be better because we're not going into it fatigued to beat up. And I call these like, for me, it's feats of strength. Right. And I have one for, my strength blocks, my competition blocks, and my hypertrophy blocks. And some of my feats of strength I've never even achieved. Still, I'm like, I've had a 405 pound barbell squat I've wanted to do for 20 reps for at least 5 years now. I've gotten 12, I've gotten 14, and I've gotten 16. I've never gotten to 20, but one day I'm going to get 20, right? And people that run and people that do marathons and people that do 10Ks, there's something similar for them where it's like there's this feat, there's this like this number or this mile marker where it's like out there and I can taste it and I want it, but I've just never gone for it. And training for that, that's where, sports performance comes in, and really needing to check those boxes. Like when you go from being I'm not a car guy, but if you're a 4-cylinder and you check all the boxes to temporarily make yourself a V8 and then you hit the goal, it's like, yeah, I'm the man,
And that's really interesting because it's easy to think about this when you think about mental stimulation or mental progression, right? Like, let's say our workout equates to a book. Like, if you keep reading the same book day in and day out, over and over and over, you're going to get bored with it. You're not going to be able to really learn much after a certain period of time. But when you start applying that to our physical, and I think sometimes physically it might be because we think it's so exhausting and that we can't do anymore, we can't go anymore, and we realize that, like you were saying, you have to take away, have more rest in between, not go so hard at certain points in time to be able to accomplish more, to be able to learn more. And there's just something really unique about physical, the term, feeling physically tired, physical exhaustion, right?
Right.
It's just like, oh, like this is just too much. Like if I sometimes at the gym, I was like, I wonder how hard I would have to go to like actually die here on this squat rack. Like what would I actually have to do? What would that equate to? Whereas mentally, it's like there's not many mental things that you could actually go 100% out to where it's like I could actually exert myself so much mentally right here that I could die. Whereas physically,
Right.
our minds think that we could actually do that physically, when in actuality, it would be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think but let's take that example and run with it a little bit. If we were to look at, what would it take for me to like die under that squat bar? The answer is, well, you have to spend 5 weeks getting in good conditioning, and then 4 weeks getting really, really strong, and then 2 weeks, uh, making sure that your strength and your endurance are complementing each other. What I mean by that is, let's say that you're only capable of a minute of really hard work, right? But when you get under that squat bar, for you to hit that number, you need to be capable of about a minute and a half of hard work. Well, we got to get your conditioning base up. And then we've got to get your strength up so that, doing that 225 for 20 reps, well, that's really, really hard if you can only squat 275. But if you can squat 405, now 225 is relatively that much easier, just like the example of you wanting to jump, right? So we got to get you strong, but we can't get you strong at the expense of endurance. So we've got to keep that endurance base up. So now we're already looking at like a 12-week process just to begin to flirt with the question of what would it take for me to die under that bar, right? We have to prepare for it. And I think a lot of times we as a society and as a people want such immediate gratification that we forget the preparatory phases. We forget that we had to go to high school before college and middle school before high school and elementary school before that. And it's the same with sports. We have to do all these different phases of training to prepare us to be able to do something that's like mind blowing, and when we're kids, our parents are doing a lot of that investment for us. They're like, all right, we're going to get him this coach and we're going to get him enrolled here and we're going to do this. And sometimes our parents don't know about things like nutrition and this and that. And they don't know that, we're lacking here, but they're making up for it in these other areas. Right. And then in turn, when we have kids, we could say, okay, now we can add these other layers and really enhance our children because we have a better sense of the whole picture. But I feel like we really get lost in the immediate gratification, and we want to see what we could do tomorrow, when really tomorrow is 20 weeks away. I was giving an example the other day to a friend that wanted to bench press a lot, and you know I told him, well, how many band press downs can you do with a blue band? And the answer was like 5. Like, all right, well, let's take 15 or 20 weeks and we're going to start with this little thin micro mini band. And for 5 weeks, you're going to do that 3 times a week. And then we're going to go from the micro mini band to the red band. And for 5 weeks, you're going to do that 3 or 4 times a week. And then we're going to do 3 to 5 weeks on the blue band. In the first 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to do, less reps than you're capable of, and then a little bit more reps. And then on the last week or the week before last, you'll do an easy session, and then you'll do a hard session, and you'll see what you could do, and then you'll recover, and then we'll go see how that impacted your bench. It took us 15 weeks to see if this band is going to benefit your bench press. What? People don't want to go through that. But that's the sense of almost most people is like, what can I do today to get better? What food can I eat? What drug can I take? What course can I take? What coach can I hire? What social media account can I follow? And they're not always looking at like this long 15 to 20 week process of preparing for that moment. And what I try and tell people is, man, if you spent 20 weeks preparing for that moment and you succeeded, you're going to cry with happiness. You're going to be like, I worked so hard for that. I tried and damn, I won. That's awesome. And that's the power of the preparation is, doing it, succeeding. And, it takes a lot out of you when you fail. But then if you learn from that and keep going, that ultimate reward at the end is like the ultimate dopamine rush, that ultimate sense of like accomplishment. And when I see people have that, and even when I have it myself, it's like I can taste it. Like, yes.
No, there's so much truth in that. Is that winning the lottery seems like it would be so much fun, is so that I could have all these things right now, but enjoying that journey of how you've got there. Like for me and Jake, it was starting this podcast just off on ourselves and trying to come up with ideas, and then getting to a point to now where we've been able to have someone like you on who's an expert at something, and being able to hear someone who speaks fluently, and we can just sit here and ask questions and entertain our viewers. For me, it was at the gym. Okay, I wanted my core to be stronger, so it's doing abs every day. I wanted my bench press to get, and my bench press and my shoulder press to get stronger, so it was doing forearms and entering those in. I wanted my legs to get stronger, so it was spending more times doing calves. And it's like those results didn't come just after doing them once. In most instances, I didn't really notice a big difference until 2 to 3 months out, or like removing the ketchup. Like I'm still hoping that I get the results from that. So it's only been January 1st. So we're hoping by April, maybe those abs will be in so that I can actually see them or something like that. You know what I mean? But
absolutely,
everything that you shared, that process of being able to read books, the process of being able to train, the process of nutrition, the journey that we've went through in our lives from where you were to where you are to where you're going now. It's just, there's been no instant gratification, but that's what brings us so much more happiness and appreciation for all that effort and everything that we put forth into it to be able to get that, man. That's awesome.
When you look at, if people are just handed money or handed victories, they don't truly appreciate them. Look at how money is spent when they didn't earn it themselves, and it's just like, here's $100, and it's like, all right, I'll go buy this $89 pair of shoes. But if they had to work for that $100, they're like, all right, I might buy this food and then buy my girlfriend that and then buy this and then buy that and buy this, and all of a sudden it's like, I've got to make that $100 do things, and life is like that, man. Like the things that you didn't like truly try for and earn, you're never going to have the sense of appreciation for, is the things that like you put in that due diligence and effort. And one of the things that I talk about doing is one day doing a youth outreach program where I get kids lifting weights and get them involved in training. And, the guys that are going to show up at Saturday at 9 a.m., they're not going to be out at the clubs on Friday. Those guys are going to weed themselves out, and then the people that stick with it, just like I did in my journey, is in the system, they will be learning things along the way that set them up for success later on. And, that doesn't happen for everybody, but it does for some, and just being on a journey and you're on a path and you're collecting victories and losses along the way and remembering those rewards. And it's a really amazing process.
That's so true, man. Those are some good final thoughts. Jake, you have any final thoughts to share?
Just that, I don't know, recently we started this podcast, a couple months ago, and it was just Chad and I talking back and forth, and now it's like during this podcast and last week's podcast too, it was just, I see myself sitting here and just completely enthralled in something that somebody is saying, and I don't know, I just never thought that I would get this experience of having someone on a podcast that actually has something to say and is so intellectual and good at speaking. And it was truly a pleasure to have you on, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Your time it was just great just sitting here. Like I take myself out of the podcast. Like I forget that I'm even here, and I'm just so enthralled in what you're saying sometimes. It was awesome.
But I mean, it's a great point of the gratification, right, Jake? I mean, I think we're actually at episode 24. So we've been doing this for almost half a year, man.
Yeah,
and it started with one episode, and it was showing up every Friday night, just me and him at 7:15. We're not going out to the club partying, but this is what we committed to do, just like our nutrition, just like our lifting. And it's just like, it's just been progressing, and it's been so much more enjoyable. And I would say so much more, maybe not healthy, but freeing. It's just as we've learned to be able to talk and speak back and forth. Where the first time I was just like, oh my gosh, dude, like I don't know what to say. We gotta write, I gotta be prepared because like I do not want to just sit on this video and not have anything to say. So everything was planned out to where now it's just like, hey, we'll have somebody on and we're just gonna talk, man, and document these awesome stories and be able to let people share who they are and where they came from.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me on, and
it
was a pleasure speaking, and I hope your audience finds it fulfilling and interesting as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle. We appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
All right.
Is there anything
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Is there anything you wanted to shout out before we ended, or?
I think I just want to say that there's a lot of people that watch this that come from different journeys, and I think it's important to remember that, like, one thing that we all have in common is a desire to go from where we are now and get to the next level. And if there's anything you could take away from this podcast, it's that, goal fulfillment and having the fortitude to stick to your goals despite failures and obstacles, and continue to put in effort, whether you're in a prison system or, in a college environment. If you put forth that effort, there are people out there that will eventually recognize it and advocate for you. And, by putting forth that effort continually, I don't believe the universe just throws things at you, but you will conduct yourself and act in a way in which the people that are also successful will want to be around you. So, I just encourage everybody to keep on working towards their goals and remember to break those goals up into smaller parts so that you can get that sense of fulfillment, right? That's important. And that's all I have.
Wow. Awesome.
That's all we have for tonight, guys.
Alrighty.
Keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
Let's go.
All right.
Have a good
See ya.
evening,
Yeah,
everybody.
you too.
See you guys.